My name is Josiah Blackwood, and I am 70 years old. 3 days after I walked my only daughter down the aisle, my new son-in-law showed up at my house with a smile, a notary, and a stack of legal documents designed to strip me of everything I owned. He thought I was just a tired old man. He didn't know I was protecting a $12 million secret. And he was about to find out that a father's love is the most dangerous thing to underestimate. Before I tell you how I turned his own greed against him, let me know in the comments where you're listening to my story from. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe that wisdom is a weapon the young often forget the old possess. The knock on my door came on a Tuesday afternoon, just 3 days after the wedding. I was in my study, a room filled with the ghosts of my past architectural drafts and the lingering scent of my late wife Annalise's favorite gardenia perfume. I opened the door to find my new son-in-law Chadwick Peterson standing on my porch. His smile was as bright and artificial as a supermarket apple. Standing slightly behind him was a nervous-looking woman clutching a briefcase. Chad stepped inside, giving me a hug that felt more like an assessment. "Dad," he said, his voice dripping with a practiced warmth. "I hope we're not interrupting anything. This is Ms. Albright, a notary. We were just in the neighborhood handling some post-wedding errands and thought we'd stop by. I am a man who has lived 70 years. I have learned that very few things in life are a coincidence, especially when they involve legal professionals showing up unannounced." I led them into the study, a room that had always been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a courtroom. Chad gestured for me to sit at my own mahogany desk, then he took the seat opposite me as if he were the one in charge. He placed a thick stack of papers between us. "So, Dad," he began, leaning forward, conspiratorially. "Amara and I were talking, and we just want to make sure you're taken care of. You've worked so hard your whole life. It's time for you to relax and let us handle the heavy lifting. This is just some standard paperwork. Power of attorney for medical decisions, you know, things like that, just to make it official that we're here for you." He pushed the papers toward me along with an expensive-looking fountain pen. His movements were smooth, too smooth. Ms. Albright, the notary, coughed nervously, opening her briefcase. I looked at the top page filled with dense legal text. Standard paperwork. My mind scoffed. There's no such thing. I picked up the stack, ignoring the pen. I leaned back in my chair and took out my reading glasses. The silence in the room stretched as I began to read. I could feel Chad's impatience radiating across the desk. He expected me to skim it, to trust him, to just sign where he pointed. He thought of me as a relic, an old man whose faculties were fading. He didn't know that my mind was the one thing I had kept as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. I read every single word: medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, and then I found it buried deep in Section 3, subsection B, a clause written in convoluted legalese that was anything but standard. It was a masterpiece of deception, granting the signatory irrevocable control over all my assets, my property, my investments, my entire life's work. It was a financial execution warrant, and my son-in-law had just served it to me with a smile. As my eyes scanned the predatory words, my mind drifted back just 72 hours earlier to the wedding. I saw my daughter Amara, her face a vision of pure joy, her eyes sparkling with love and hope. She looked so much like her mother Annalise. Annalise would have seen right through Chad. She had a gift for spotting insincerity. She used to say that some people are like beautiful houses with rotting foundations. From the outside you see the perfect paint and the manicured lawn. But she could smell the decay. I had smelled it too. I remembered the first time Amara brought him home. He was perfect on paper. A charming investment consultant with a quick wit and a disarming smile. He praised my architectural work. He brought my favorite bourbon. He called me sir. But then I saw him looking at the Patek Philippe on my wrist, a watch my own father had given me. He wasn't admiring it. He was appraising it. The look in his eyes was cold, calculating. It was the look of a wolf sizing up a flock. I had tried to dismiss it, blaming my own paternal anxiety. But now, sitting at my desk with this document in my hands, I knew my instincts had been screaming the truth all along. This wasn't a man who loved my daughter. This was a man who saw her as a key to a vault. And I was the lock he needed to pick. The flashback faded, and I was back in the silence of my study, the weight of the papers in my hand feeling heavier than stone. I had kept my $12 million inheritance a secret to protect Amara from men exactly like this. I wanted her to be loved for who she was, not for what she had. And now here was the proof, the validation of my deepest fears written in black and white. Chad didn't know about the inheritance. He was doing all of this just for my pension and my house. The scale of his greed was breathtaking. I slowly took off my glasses and folded them, placing them deliberately on the desk. I looked at Chad, whose smile was beginning to look strained. I then looked at the nervous notary, who seemed to wish the ground would swallow her whole. I pushed the papers back across the desk. "Thank you for your concern, Chad," I said, my voice perfectly level. "But I won't be signing anything today, or any other day. My lawyer handles all my affairs." The mask dropped. For a single unguarded second, the charming son-in-law vanished, and a predator looked out from his eyes. A flicker of cold rage, a flash of frustration so intense it was almost palpable. Then it was gone, replaced by a forced laugh. "Of course, Dad, of course," he said, standing up too quickly. "No problem at all. Just a thought. We just want what's best for you." He practically pulled the notary out of her chair and steered her toward the door. As they left, the friendly facade was back in place, but it was cracked, and I could see the ugliness underneath. The front door clicked shut. I sat alone in the quiet of my home. The silence was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. My worst fears had been realized. But with that confirmation came a strange clarity. The time for passive worry was over. The time for action had begun. He thought he was hunting a sheep. He was about to find out he had stumbled into a lion's den. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the encounter in my mind. The casual arrogance of his approach, the predatory gleam in his eyes, the way his charm curdled into barely concealed fury when I refused him. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. He saw me as an obstacle, an old man to be managed and discarded. My phone buzzed on the desk, jolting me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with Amara's picture, her bright, smiling face from a happier time. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I knew this call was coming. I knew Chad would have gotten to her first, twisting the story to paint himself as the victim. I took a deep breath and answered, "Dad." Her voice was strained tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't her usual warmth. "Hi, sweetheart. How's the happy couple?" I tried to keep my tone light, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "I just got off the phone with Chad," she said, her voice rising. "He told me what happened." "Dad, I can't believe you." "Believe what, Amara?" "That I read a legal document before signing it." She ignored my question. "He was just trying to help. He's worried about you all alone in that big house. He feels like part of the family, and you treated him like a criminal. He's so hurt." The words felt like they were being fed to her. I could almost picture Chad standing behind her, whispering in her ear. I felt a surge of anger, not at Amara, but at him for using her like this, for turning my daughter's love and concern into a weapon against me. "Amara, your husband tried to get me to sign away control of my entire life. That isn't help, that's a hostile takeover. Oh my God, Dad, listen to yourself. You're being so paranoid. You've been like this ever since I met him. You've never given him a chance. It's like you don't want me to be happy." Each word was a small, sharp jab. This was his true poison. Not just stealing my money, but severing my bond with my daughter. Isolating me. "That is the furthest thing from the truth, and you know it," I said, my voice low and firm. "I want your happiness more than anything in this world. That's why I'm being careful." "Careful," she scoffed. "It sounds like you're being selfish." "This is our family now, Dad. You have to start trusting my judgment. You have to start trusting my husband. Maybe we should just give you some space until you're ready to be a part of it." The line went dead. She had hung up on me. I stared at the phone in my hand, the silence in the room pressing in on me. He had done it. In the space of a single afternoon, he had confirmed my suspicions and turned my own daughter against me. I was alone. That's what he wanted. He thought that if I was alone, I would be weak, vulnerable, easy to break. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Annalise had so lovingly tended. For a moment, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. The fight seemed too large, the enemy too insidious. He had my daughter's heart, and that was a fortress I couldn't breach with logic or reason. But then I looked at a photograph on my desk. It was me, Annalise, and a 5-year-old Amara sitting on this very porch. The joy in that photo, the pure, untainted love. That was my legacy. That was what I was fighting for. Chad was right about one thing. I was an old man. But he had made a classic mistake. He had confused age with weakness. He didn't understand that my 70 years hadn't just given me gray hair and aching joints. They had given me patience. They had given me experience. And most importantly, they had taught me that you don't win a war with a single battle. You win it with a strategy. My phone call to Amara had been a defeat, but the war was far from over. I picked up my phone again. This time I didn't call my daughter. I called my oldest friend Henry Carter, a man who spent 30 years as a homicide detective. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the attack. Hank's Diner wasn't a diner named after him. It was just the place he'd been eating breakfast 3 times a week for the last 40 years. It smelled of old coffee, burnt bacon, and the kind of lived-in comfort that you can't manufacture. The vinyl on the booth seats was cracked, and the tabletop had the faint, sticky residue that no amount of wiping could ever fully remove. It was perfect. Henry Hank Carter slid into the booth opposite me. At 72, he still had the broad shoulders and steady gaze of a man who had spent his life looking into the worst parts of human nature and not flinching. His handshake was like a vice grip, a silent reminder of the strength he still possessed. He took a long sip of his black coffee before speaking. "You sounded like hell on the phone, Josiah. What's going on? You look like you haven't slept since the wedding." "I haven't," I admitted. I pushed a stray salt shaker around on the table, my fingers trembling slightly. "I don't even know where to begin, Hank. I feel like I've failed. As a father. As a protector." Hank leaned forward, his eyes sharp and focused. "Start at the beginning. And stop blaming yourself. Blame is a luxury. Right now you need a plan." And so I told him everything. I started with the secret, the $12 million from my father's estate. I saw a flicker of surprise in Hank's eyes, but he didn't interrupt. He was a professional listener, a man who knew that the most important clues are often hidden in the details. I told him about my initial gut feeling about Chad, that cold appraisal in his eyes when he looked at my watch. I described the wedding, the forced perfection of it all, the vague sense of unease that had settled over me like a shroud. Then I got to the heart of it, the unannounced visit, the notary, the stack of papers designed to legally erase me from my own life. As I described the clause, the irrevocable power of attorney Hank's jaw tightened. He let out a low whistle. "The kid's got guts, I'll give him that. That's not an amateur move, Josiah. That's calculated, predatory. He's done this before." "That's what I thought," I said, my voice hoarse. "But the worst part, Hank, the worst part is Amara." I recounted the phone call, the chilling echo of Chad's manipulative language in my daughter's voice, the accusation that I was paranoid, that I was selfish, that I was the one trying to ruin her happiness. As I spoke, the pain of that conversation felt fresh all over again. "She hung up on me, Hank. My own daughter. He's gotten inside her head so completely that she can't see the truth. She sees me as the enemy." Hank took another slow sip of his coffee, processing everything. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond my shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and gravelly. "He's isolating you. It's the first chapter in the Predator's Handbook. Make the target feel alone. Make them feel like they're the crazy one. If he can cut you off from her, he knows you're more likely to give in just to have your daughter back. He's using your love for her as leverage. So what do?" I asked the question, feeling the full weight of my helplessness. I can't reason with her. If I push too hard, I'll lose her for good. I'm trapped. "No, you're not trapped," Hank said firmly, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're just fighting on the wrong battlefield. You can't win a war of words with a manipulator. You have to win a war of facts. You can't tell Amara that her husband is a monster. You have to show her. You need leverage. You need evidence so undeniable that she has no choice but to see him for what he is." My friend, the retired detective, was gone. In his place was the investigator, the man who knew how to dig. "You did the right thing by calling me Josiah. We're not going to play defense anymore. We're going on the hunt. I'm going to find out everything there is to know about Mr. Chadwick Peterson. Where he came from, who his family is, where his money comes from, or more likely where it doesn't. I'm going to dig up every skeleton in his closet. And when I'm done, you're going to have a dossier on him so thick it'll break his pretty boy face." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had an ally. And my ally knew how to fight in the dark. Hank leaned back in the cracked vinyl booth, a grim look on his face. He ran a hand over his clean-shaven head, a habit I knew he had when he was piecing together a particularly ugly puzzle. He was silent for a full minute, letting my words hang in the greasy air of the diner. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and hard, like gravel grinding under a truck tire. "So, let me get this straight. The kid waltzes into your life, marries your daughter, and less than a week later, he's at your door with a notary trying to get you to sign your life away. And when you don't roll over, he turns your own kid against you like a loaded gun." I just nodded, the shame and anger churning inside me. Hank shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, but in a kind of weary confirmation. "Josiah, this isn't just some slick opportunist trying to get lucky. This is a professional. What you've described is a textbook sweetheart scam, but on a whole other level. He's not just after a few $1,000s. He's playing for the whole damn estate. The legal documents, the notary, the immediate psychological manipulation of Amara. That's not impulse. That's a rehearsed strategy. A script he's probably used before." My blood ran cold. "Before? You think he's done this to other people? I'd bet my pension on it. Guys like this don't just wake up one morning with a fully formed plan to defraud their father-in-law. They practice. They refine their methods. They learn what works. They find emotionally vulnerable women from wealthy families and they sink their teeth in. Your daughter, God bless her, is not his partner. She's his tool, his key." He took a napkin and pulled a pen from his pocket. He started sketching on it like he was mapping out a crime scene. "Look, his strategy has two parts. First is the legal blitzkrieg. He comes at you fast and hard, hoping to overwhelm you before you know what's happening. He was betting on you being a doting old man, too grief-stricken from your wife's passing and too trusting to read the fine print. That failed. So he immediately pivoted to phase 2. Psychological warfare." He tapped the pen on the napkin. "He's using the most powerful weapon he has against you. Amara. By isolating you, by making you the villain in her eyes, he thinks he can wear you down. He figures you'll eventually cave, you'll sign whatever he wants just to stop the fighting, just to get your daughter back in your life. It's a classic siege mentality. Cut off the target's emotional supply lines and wait for them to surrender." He was laying it all out with such cold clarity. It was horrifying, but it was also liberating. I wasn't just a paranoid old father. I was the target of a deliberate and calculated attack. "So what's our move?" I asked, my voice finding a strength I hadn't felt in days. "Our move?" Hank said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "Our move is to stop playing his game and start playing ours. He thinks he's a ghost, a man with a perfect story for every situation. We're going to prove he's not. We're going to dig into his life so deep we'll know what he had for breakfast in the 3rd grade." He circled a word on the napkin. "Leverage. That's the name of the game. We can't fight him on the emotional front. He owns that territory right now through Amara. We have to fight him with facts, cold, hard, undeniable proof. We need to build a case against him so solid that when you present it to Amara, she won't be able to look away. We have to make the truth louder than his lies." He leaned in, his eyes locking onto mine. "This is what we're going to do. I'm going to start a full background check on Chadwick Peterson. Not one of those cheap online things. A real one. Financial records, credit reports, property searches. I'm going to check for bankruptcies, past lawsuits, restraining orders. I'm going to find his real family, not the actors he hired for the wedding. We're going to find out if he even has a real job. We're going to build a timeline of his life and find the cracks. And trust me, Josiah, there are always cracks." He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. He was a man with a mission now. "Your job is simple. You lay low. You don't engage with him. You be polite but distant with Amara. Don't give him any more ammunition to use against you. Just act like a sad old man who's been pushed away. Let him get comfortable. Let him think he's winning, because while he's celebrating, we'll be in his backyard digging up all the bodies he's buried." He stood up and put a $20 bill on the table. "Finish your coffee, Josiah, and get some sleep. The hunt has just begun." The call came 2 days later. I had been existing in a state of suspended animation, pacing my house, unable to focus on reading or sketching. Every ring of the phone sent a jolt of anxiety through me, fearing it was Amara calling to escalate our conflict. When I saw Hank's name on the caller ID, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. The truth was coming, and I knew it wouldn't be pretty. "Josiah, you there?" Hank's voice was clipped all business. "I'm here. What did you find? I've just scratched the surface, but it's already worse than we thought. Our boy, Chadwick Peterson, the successful investment consultant. He's a financial ghost, or more accurately, a financial black hole. What do you mean? I asked, my hand gripping the receiver tighter. I mean, the guy is drowning in debt. I'm talking a sea of red ink. I pulled his credit reports from all three bureaus. It's a horror show. He has over $150,000 in high-interest credit card debt spread across 12 different cards. Most of them are maxed out to the penny. He's got a defaulted loan for a consulting business that went under 2 years ago to the tune of another 80 grand. His car, the fancy BMW he drove to your house, it was repossessed 6 months ago. The one he's driving now is a long-term lease that's 2 months behind on payments. I sank into a chair in my study trying to process the numbers. The image of Chad, so confident, so successful, was shattering into 1,000 pieces. But how is that possible, Hank? He wears designer clothes, he takes Amara to expensive restaurants, he gave her that enormous engagement ring. Where does all that money come from? It doesn't come from anywhere, Hank explained. His voice grim. It's a shell game, a Ponzi scheme of his own life. He pays one credit card with a cash advance from another. He takes out new loans to cover the interest on old ones. He's living on fumes, Josiah. The entire image he's built is a house of cards. He's not an investor. He's a juggler, and he's one dropped ball away from total collapse. That engagement ring, I'd be willing to bet it's either a fake or he bought it with a fraudulent loan that's about to come due. It all started to make sense. The desperation, the rush to get me to sign those papers. He wasn't just looking for a comfortable future. He was looking for a bailout, a lifeline. My money wasn't just a bonus, it was a necessity for his survival. He didn't just want to be rich, he needed to be rich to keep his whole world from imploding. And Amara is standing right next to him when it all comes crashing down, I whispered the thought aloud. That's the end game, Hank affirmed. He marries into a stable family, gets his hands on the assets, and uses them to pay off his mountains of debt. By the time your daughter figures out what's happened, he'll have either drained the accounts or entangled her so deeply in his financial mess that she'll have a hard time ever getting out. He's not just a liar, Josiah. He's a parasite. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was no longer just a suspicion. This was a fact. A hard, ugly, number-backed fact. The first piece of evidence was on the table. It was the foundation upon which we would build our case. Keep digging, Hank. I said, my voice low but steady. Keep digging until there's nowhere left for him to hide. Don't you worry about that, Hank replied. I'm just getting started. The next phone call from Hank had a different tone. There was no preamble, no casual greeting, just a simple command. Josiah, I need you to be at your house in an hour. We need to talk in person. This isn't phone call material. He hung up before I could ask any questions. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The financial debt was a storm. This felt like a hurricane. I spent the next hour pacing the length of my living room, my mind racing through 100 terrible possibilities. When the doorbell finally rang, I felt a grim sense of resignation. Whatever was coming, I had to face it. I led Hank into my study. He was carrying a worn leather briefcase I hadn't seen in years, the one he used to use when he was working on his most difficult cases. He didn't sit down. He walked over to my large architect's desk, cleared a space among my blueprints, and laid out a series of documents. They were photocopies of legal papers, court filings, bank statements. The debt was just the beginning, he said, his voice low. That's just the smoke. I found the fire. Our boy Chad isn't just bad with money, Josiah. He collects it, from women like your daughter. He slid the first document across the desk. It was a civil lawsuit filed 3 years ago in Scottsdale, Arizona. The plaintiff was a 68-year-old woman named Eleanor Vance, a recent widow. I read the summary, my breath catching in my chest. It was a story that was sickeningly familiar. Chadwick Peterson had entered her life 6 months after her husband's death. He had joined her grief support group. He showered her with attention, affection, and a shoulder to cry on. He told her he was an investment expert and that her late husband's financial manager was taking advantage of her. He convinced her to transfer her entire portfolio, nearly $2 million, into his care. He put it all into high-risk ventures and shell companies, Hank explained, tracing a line on the paper with his finger. By the time her children got suspicious and hired a lawyer, nearly half the money was gone, vanished. They sued him for fraud and emotional distress, so he went to jail. I asked, a sliver of hope in my voice. Hank shook his head. No. The family was wealthy and concerned about their reputation. They didn't want their mother's name dragged through the mud in a public trial. Chad's lawyer negotiated a settlement. He paid back a fraction of what he stole, a few $100,000, in exchange for them dropping the suit and signing a non-disclosure agreement. He bought his way out of a conviction. He then pushed a second set of documents in front of me. This one was from San Diego, filed just last year. The plaintiff was a 52-year-old woman named Catherine Monroe who had just gone through a contentious divorce. Different victim, same playbook, Hank continued. He met her at a charity gala, swept her off her feet, convinced her that her ex-husband would try to hide assets and that she should move her settlement money somewhere safe. His company, of course. She gave him $800,000. 2 months later, the company folded and the money was gone. She sued him too. And just like the Vance family, she settled out of court. He probably paid her off with some of the money he took from the widow in Arizona. It's a cycle, Josiah, a predatory rotation. He finds a victim, bleeds them dry, and then uses a portion of the stolen money to silence them when they fight back. Then he moves on to the next one. I sank into my chair, the papers blurring in front of me. I saw their faces in my mind, Eleanor and Catherine. I saw their vulnerability, their trust. And then I saw Amara. She wasn't just another potential victim. She was the next name on his list. The pattern was undeniable. The charm offensive, the isolation from family, the manufactured crisis, the promise of financial security, and then the inevitable betrayal. He wasn't just an opportunist. He was a serial predator. His entire life, his entire identity was a meticulously crafted illusion, designed for one purpose: to find women with money and emotionally cripple them until they handed it over. This changes everything, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This isn't just about protecting my inheritance anymore. He's dangerous. He's a sociopath, Hank said bluntly, leaving no room for doubt. He doesn't feel empathy or remorse. These women, your daughter, they're not people to him. They're resources. They're marks. And the fact that he settled both cases tells me something else. It tells me he's smart. He knows exactly how far he can push before he crosses the line from a civil offense to a criminal one. He operates in the gray area of the law. He breaks hearts and bank accounts, but he's careful not to break laws in a way that will land him in a prison cell. He's a ghost. By the time his victims realize what's happened, he's already gone, and the legal trail is so murky it's almost impossible to follow. I looked at the documents, then at my old friend. The hope I had felt a few days ago was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fear. But beneath the fear, a different feeling was beginning to smolder. A slow, burning rage. This man had a system for destroying lives. And he had brought that system into my home and aimed it at my daughter. Hank seemed to read my mind. I know this is hard to hear, Josiah, but it's better that we know. Now we know exactly who we're dealing with. Not a greedy son-in-law, but a professional hunter. And that means we have to be smarter than him. We have to be more patient. And we have to build a trap that he can't buy or talk his way out of. A week passed in near silence. I didn't hear from Amara, and I didn't dare to call her. The distance between us felt like a vast, unbridgeable canyon. My only contact with the outside world was Hank. He would check in with brief text messages saying only, "still digging," or "making progress." Each message was a small reassurance that I wasn't alone in this fight. Then, on a Friday evening, my phone rang. It was Hank. "Josiah, I've got something, and you're not going to believe it. I'm on my way over. Make a fresh pot of coffee, a strong one." There was a new urgency in his voice, a sharpness that cut through the phone line. This was different from the previous discoveries. This was something bigger. I did as he said, my hands moving automatically while my mind raced. When he arrived, he wasn't carrying a briefcase full of papers. He was carrying a laptop. He set it up on my desk, pushing aside the legal documents from the previous cases. "Before I show you this," he said, his eyes serious, "I want you to tell me about Chad's family, the people you met at the wedding. Tell me about his parents, John and Mary, I believe." I searched my memory, recalling the carefully orchestrated event. John was a big man with a booming laugh who told a long, rambling story about Chad's supposed success in college football. He seemed like a proud father. Mary was a quiet woman who dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief during the ceremony. She told me I had raised a beautiful daughter and that she was so happy to welcome her into their family. There was a brother, a sister, cousins. They all seemed so perfect, so normal. A happy, loving, all-American family. I described them to Hank in as much detail as I could. He listened patiently, nodding. When I was finished, he turned the laptop to face me. The screen showed the website for a company called Evergreen Actors Guild. The tagline read, "Providing professional talent for corporate events, marketing, and personal engagements." My heart began to beat faster. I didn't understand. What does this have to do with anything Hank said? Nothing. He just used the trackpad to click on a link that said, "Our Talent." A gallery of headshots appeared. He clicked on the first one. It was a man in his late 60s with a broad smile. The man I knew as John Peterson, but the name under the picture was William Davies. His professional bio listed his specialties as authoritative father figures and warm corporate executives. My mouth went dry. "No," I whispered. Hank's face was grim. He clicked on the next picture, a woman with soft, kind eyes, Mary Peterson, or, as the website called her, Sandra Mills. Her specialty, nurturing maternal roles and sympathetic characters. He continued clicking. The brother was an aspiring actor named Kevin who listed best man speeches as a skill. The sister was a drama student named Chloe. One by one, the faces of the happy, loving family I had met at the wedding appeared on the screen, stripped of their fictional names and reduced to their professional headshots. They weren't a family. They were a cast. Then Hank opened a new file. It was a scanned document, an invoice, from the Evergreen Actors Guild billed to a shell company that I now knew belonged to Chad. It was dated the day after the wedding. It listed each actor by their real name and the role they played: John Peterson, father of the groom; Mary Peterson, mother of the groom. It even listed the rates: $800 per day for the parental roles, $500 for the siblings. It was all there in black and white, a receipt for a rented family. The deception was so complete, so monstrous that I couldn't speak. My daughter hadn't just married a liar. She had married a ghost, a man who had fabricated his entire personal history. The foundation of their life together wasn't just cracked. It didn't exist. It was a stage set, and the play was over. But if they weren't his family, then who is? I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. "That's the last piece of the puzzle," Hank said, his voice softer now. "I found them. His real parents. They live in a small town in rural Oregon. I spoke to his father this morning. It took a lot to get him to talk. He was ashamed, heartbroken." Hank paused, taking a deep breath. "It turns out Chadwick Peterson is the name he was born with, but it's the only true thing about him. He was a problem from the start. Lying, stealing, manipulating. He dropped out of high school. He scammed people in their small town. His parents spent years paying off his debts trying to help him. 10 years ago, he convinced them to invest their entire retirement savings, $100,000, in a can't-miss tech startup. The company and the money vanished overnight. That was the last they ever saw of him. His father told me he hadn't spoken to Chad in a decade. His last words to me on the phone were a warning. He said, 'My son is a black hole. He doesn't just take your money, he takes your hope. He will consume everything you love and leave you with nothing.'" I stared at the invoice on the screen, the cold transactional details of the greatest lie I had ever witnessed. All the pieces clicked into place: the debt, the previous victims, the fake family. It was all part of one grand illusion. An illusion my daughter was now living inside. The anger I had felt before was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a clarity so cold and sharp it felt like a shard of ice in my heart. This was no longer just a fight to protect my daughter. This was a mission to liberate her. Chad hadn't just built a house of cards, he had built a prison. And this invoice, this beautiful, ugly piece of paper, this was the key that was going to set my daughter free. Evelyn Reed's office was on the 30th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper downtown. The view from her window was a sprawling panorama of the city, a testament to the power and influence wielded within these walls. The office itself was minimalist and modern, all clean lines, chrome and white leather. There wasn't a single unnecessary object on her desk. It was the workspace of a mind that was organized, sharp, and ruthlessly efficient. This was no longer a conversation in a comfortable study or a greasy spoon diner. This was a war room. Hank and I sat opposite her at a large glass conference table. Between us lay a neat stack of files, the sum of all our fears and all our evidence. Ms. Reed, a woman in her 40s with an intelligent gaze that missed nothing, had already been my family's lawyer for years. She handled my will and my late wife's estate. She was discreet and professional, but she had never seen anything like this. Hank took the lead. He laid out the case with the methodical precision of a veteran detective briefing his captain. He spoke in a calm, factual tone that made the monstrous details seem even more chilling. He started with the document, the power of attorney that Chad had tried to get me to sign. He then moved on to the financial records, presenting the spreadsheets that detailed over $200,000 of debt. He explained the shell game Chad was playing with credit cards and fraudulent loans. Ms. Reed listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. She didn't take notes. She simply absorbed the information, her eyes never leaving Hank's face. Then Hank slid the copies of the civil lawsuits across the table. He detailed the cases of Eleanor Vance and Catherine Monroe. He pointed out the identical patterns, the targeting of vulnerable women, the emotional manipulation, the financial drain, and the out-of-court settlements. He established the modus operandi. This, he said, his voice low, is not an opportunist. This is a serial predator. Finally, he came to the last file. He opened it and placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. It was the invoice from the Evergreen Actors Guild. The family he created for the wedding was a complete fabrication, Hank stated flatly. The proud parents, the loving siblings, all hired actors. We have the receipt. I watched Ms. Reed as she picked up the invoice. Her expression remained impassive, but I saw her eyes narrow ever so slightly as she read the line items. Father of the groom, $800. Mother of the groom, $800. She placed the paper back on the table with a quiet finality. The presentation was over. The full scope of Chadwick Peterson's deception lay exposed on the polished glass surface. She was silent for a long time. The only sound was the faint hum of the city 30 floors below. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What if she said there was nothing we could do? What if he was too smart, too slippery? When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and measured, devoid of any shock or outrage. It was the voice of a strategist assessing a battlefield. This is the most comprehensive and sociopathic case of marital fraud I have ever seen, she said simply. Hank, your investigation is impeccable. She looked at me. Josiah, what is your goal here? Do you want to pursue criminal charges? I looked at Hank, then back at her. A criminal trial would be public, messy. It would drag Amara's name through the mud. It would destroy her. No, I said, my voice firm. I don't want to put him in jail. I want to get him out of my daughter's life. Permanently. I want to open her eyes to the truth in a way she can never deny, and I want to make sure he walks away with absolutely nothing. Ms. Reed nodded slowly, a flicker of what looked like approval in her eyes. A criminal case would be difficult, she explained. As Hank pointed out, Mr. Peterson is very skilled at operating in the gray areas. He manipulates and deceives, but proving criminal intent for fraud beyond a reasonable doubt can be challenging and traumatic for the victim, your daughter. He would paint himself as a failed businessman and Amara as a scorned wife. It would get ugly. She leaned forward, her focus entirely on me now. However, a civil confrontation is another matter entirely. We don't need to convince a jury. We only need to convince one person. Amara. And with this evidence, she paused, gesturing to the files on the table. With this, we have more than enough ammunition to not just convince her, but to completely dismantle the reality he has built around her. He has constructed a perfect illusion, and we are now in possession of the evidence to shatter it to pieces. He thinks he's untouchable. It's time we build a trap that his charm, his lies, and his lawyers can't get him out of. It's time we write a new contract, one that he'll be forced to sign. Ms. Reed leaned back in her chair, the picture of calm professionalism, but her eyes held a new intensity, a strategic glint that told me the time for assessment was over. The time for action had arrived. All right, she said, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the heavy silence in the room. We have the evidence. Now we need a strategy. In a situation like this, a frontal assault is a mistake. If we confront Chad directly with these facts, he will deny everything. He will twist the story, paint himself as the victim of a smear campaign by a jealous father who never liked him. He will manipulate Amara, make her feel like she has to choose between her father and her husband. Given her current state of mind, she will choose him. We cannot win by fighting him on his terms. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. So we are going to fight him on our terms. We are going to build a cage. A beautiful gilded cage made of legal contracts and financial clauses. And we are going to make it look so appealing that he will walk into it willingly, lock the door behind himself, and hand us the key. We are not going to accuse him of anything. We are going to give him exactly what he thinks he wants." Hank and I exchanged a look. I could see he was intrigued. "Here is the plan," she continued. "Josiah, you are going to establish a new legal entity. We will call it the Blackwood Legacy Trust. It will be an irrevocable trust, which is very important. That means once assets are transferred into it, they cannot be easily removed. They are governed solely by the rules we write into the trust document." She began to pace slowly in front of the window, the city skyline a dramatic backdrop to her words. "The story we will present to Amara and Chad is this. You have been reflecting on your legacy. You want to ensure the family's future is secure for generations to come. Therefore, you have decided to place your entire estate, including the recently acquired $12 million inheritance from your father, into this trust. The trust will be managed by a professional trustee, a neutral third party that I will help you select." She stopped and looked directly at me. "The bait is this. The primary beneficiary of the trust will be your daughter, Amara. We will structure it so that she receives a generous annual income from the interest and dividends generated by the $12 million. We're talking a substantial six-figure income for the rest of her life without ever touching the principal." When Chad hears this, when he sees a future of effortless wealth stretching out before him, his greed will blind him to everything else. He will see the finish line. He will believe he has won. Hank let out a low whistle of appreciation. "That's a tasty piece of cheese." "Exactly," Ms. Reed said with a thin smile. "But every piece of cheese comes with a trap. And our trap is a single clause buried in the middle of the 50-page document. We will call it the Dignity and Integrity Clause. I will frame it as a standard provision in high-value estate planning designed to protect the family's name from scandal. It will seem completely normal, but its language will be our weapon." She returned to the table, picking up a blank legal pad as if she was already drafting the words in her head. "The clause will have two parts. First, the vetting provision. This will state that any spouse of a direct beneficiary must agree to a full and comprehensive background check to be conducted by the trustee. This includes financial, criminal, and personal histories. This check is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing condition for the disbursement of funds. This forces him into a corner, Josiah. If he agrees, his entire house of cards will be exposed by the trustee. If he refuses, he will have to explain to Amara why he is unwilling to be vetted. His refusal itself becomes a confession. My mind reeled at the simple brilliance of it. It was a perfect dilemma. But what if he lies? What if he tries to obstruct the investigation, I asked. That's where the second part comes in. Ms. Reed replied, her eyes alight with strategic fire. The disinheritance provision. This part will be our kill shot. It will state that if it is ever proven that a spouse has engaged in fraudulent activity, financial misconduct, or a profound and material misrepresentation of their personal history to the family, that individual is immediately and permanently disinherited from any and all benefits of the trust, both direct and indirect. Furthermore, their actions will be considered a breach of the trust's foundational terms, which will give the trustee the power to freeze all payments to the beneficiary. In this case, Amara, until the situation can be legally and definitively resolved. I stared at her in awe. I finally understood. We weren't just cutting him off. We were giving ourselves the power to turn off the money tap for Amara, forcing her to confront the reason why. It was a checkmate move. So we present this to them as your grand gesture of generosity. Hank summarized, a look of deep respect on his face. He gets excited about the money. He signs the consent forms to get access to it. And in doing so, he unknowingly consents to his own execution. It's beautiful. Precisely, Ms. Reed confirmed. The final step is simple. In a few days, Josiah, you will call Amara. You will not apologize, but you will be conciliatory. You will tell her you have been doing a lot of thinking and that you have a wonderful plan to secure the family's future, and you want to discuss it with both of them. You will plant the seed. You will mention the trust and the $12 million. Let her be the one to carry the good news to her husband. Let him believe this is all his victory. Let him get arrogant. Let him think the old man has finally surrendered, because pride, as they say, comes before the fall, and we are about to build a fall so great it will shatter his entire world. I looked at the plan laid out before me, so intricate, so intelligent, so ruthless. It wasn't born of anger or revenge. It was born of pure logic. It was a perfect machine designed to be powered by one thing: Chad's own greed. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of control. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calm certainty. The hunt was over. The trap was now designed, and soon it would be time to welcome the predator home. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in a deceptively bright autumn sun. We were in Ms. Reed's conference room once again. This time, it didn't feel like a war room. It felt like a stage meticulously set for a final performance. Hank was with me, a silent pillar of support. Ms. Reed sat at the head of the glass table, a neat stack of documents in front of her. The trap was laid. All we had to do was wait for the predator to walk into it. My internal monologue was a storm of conflicting emotions. 2 weeks ago, I had made the call. I had spoken to Amara, my voice carefully calibrated to sound weary and conciliatory. I told her I had been wrong to be so suspicious. I told her I had been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about legacy. And then I laid the bait. I told her about my plan to create the Blackwood Legacy Trust and fund it with the entirety of my $12 million inheritance. The change in her was immediate. The coldness in her voice melted away, replaced by a breathless excitement. "Oh, Dad, that's wonderful," she had exclaimed. It was the first time in weeks I had heard genuine warmth from her. I knew in that moment that the bait had been taken. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls became more frequent. She would call to check in, her conversations peppered with questions that were clearly fed to her by Chad. Questions about the trustee, the timeline for setting up the trust, the structure of the payouts. It was a painful charade. I had to play the part of the benevolent dotard, finally seeing the light while knowing that every excited word from my daughter was a testament to the success of her husband's manipulation. The door to the conference room opened. Amara entered first, her face glowing with happiness. She rushed over and gave me a hug that felt more genuine than any I had received in months. It almost broke my heart. She was so caught up in the illusion of a happy, reconciled family that she was completely blind to the execution that was about to take place. And then Chad walked in behind her. If arrogance had a physical form, it would be Chadwick Peterson in that moment. He was wearing a new suit, one that I was sure was bought on credit in anticipation of his coming fortune. He strode into the room, not like a son-in-law, but like a conquering hero. He clapped me on the shoulder, his smile wide and predatory. "Dad," he boomed, his voice full of false sincerity, "I am so glad you came to your senses. This is a great day for the family. A great day." He took his seat next to Amara, beaming at Ms. Reed as if she were his personal employee about to deliver him a winning lottery ticket. He was radiating an aura of smug victory so thick you could almost taste it. He believed he had won. He believed the tired old man had finally surrendered to his superior charm and intellect. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. I looked at his triumphant face, then at my daughter's innocent, hopeful expression. I steeled myself. The performance had to be perfect. The pain would come later, but first came the reckoning. Ms. Reed gave a small professional smile and straightened the documents in front of her. "Thank you both for coming," she began, her voice calm and even. "We have a lot to go over. This trust is a significant step for the family's future, and I want to ensure everyone understands exactly how it will work." Ms. Reed slid a beautifully bound document to the center of the table. Its cover was embossed with gold letters that read, "The Blackwood Legacy Trust." It looked less like a legal contract and more like a sacred text. As I mentioned, she began, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Josiah has been working closely with me to create a structure that will not only provide for you, Amara, but will protect and grow the family's assets for generations to come. He wanted to create a legacy of security and prosperity." I watched Chad's face as she spoke. He leaned forward, a subtle shift in his posture from casual arrogance to focused intensity. He was like a predator that had just heard the snap of a twig in the undergrowth. "The core of the plan is this irrevocable trust," Ms. Reed continued. "The principle of the trust, which will be the full $12 million from your grandfather's estate, will be permanently invested and managed by an independent trustee. This ensures the foundational wealth is never at risk. It is locked in place to grow for your children and your children's children." She paused and looked directly at Amara, a warm smile on her face. "Now for the part that concerns your immediate future. The trust is designed to generate a significant annual income, based on conservative market projections of returns, The trustee will be instructed to disburse the net income to you as the primary beneficiary. Amara, we are projecting an annual income for you of approximately $450,000. The number hung in the air, $450,000, every year, for the rest of her life. I saw Amara's eyes widen, her hand flying to her mouth in a small gasp of disbelief. She looked at me, a silent question in her eyes, and I gave a small gentle nod, as if this was all a wonderful surprise to me, too. But it was Chad's reaction that I was truly watching. The change in him was profound. The smugness on his face didn't just grow, it transformed. It was like watching a prospector who had been panning for gold for months finally see a massive nugget gleaming in his pan. His eyes glazed over with pure, unrestrained avarice. The mask of the charming son-in-law was gone, replaced by the naked face of greed. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He reached over and squeezed Amara's hand a little too tightly. His knuckles were white. 450, he stammered, pretending to be overwhelmed for Amara's sake. Dad, I don't know what to say. This is beyond generous. My internal monologue was screaming. He called me Dad. The word felt like acid on his tongue. He saw himself as the master of this new universe. The lord of a financial dynasty he had done nothing to build. He was already spending the money in his head. I could see it. The faster cars, the bigger houses, the adulation of people he wanted to impress. He was looking at Ms. Reed now not as my lawyer, but as his own personal treasurer. Ms. Reed continued unfazed. The trust also includes provisions for major life events, a housing allowance for a primary residence, funding for any future children's education, through to the postgraduate level, and comprehensive healthcare coverage. The goal here is complete financial security. Josiah wanted to ensure that you both would be free to pursue your passions without ever having to worry about mortgages or medical bills again. This is incredible, Chad breathed out. He was practically vibrating with excitement. He looked at Amara, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that I could still hear. See, baby, I told you he'd come around. I told you he just needed time. We're set for life. Our kids are set for life. Amara was crying now, quiet tears of joy and relief. She looked at me, her face full of love. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered. Thank you for trusting him. Thank you for trusting us. Her words were a knife in my gut. This beautiful moment for her was built on the most profound deception. I had to hold my composure to see this through to the end for her sake. The trap was working perfectly. Chad was so blinded by the golden vision Ms. Reed had painted that he would have signed a confession to murder if it was placed in front of him. He was completely mesmerized, completely under the spell. Ms. Reed let the silence hang for a moment, allowing them to fully absorb the magnitude of their supposed good fortune. Then she cleared her throat gently, bringing them back to the room. I'm so glad you're both pleased, she said warmly. Now, the document itself is quite comprehensive. Most of it is standard legal language defining the trustee's responsibilities and investment strategies. But as with any trust of this value, there are a few administrative clauses we need to review together. They are designed to protect the integrity of the trust and ensure it operates as intended for the long term. It's mostly just boilerplate stuff, but we should go through it so everything is transparent. She turned a page in the document. Chad nodded eagerly, waving a hand dismissively. Of course, whatever you say. We trust you completely. Let's get it done. He was ready to sign. He was practically bouncing in his seat. He had no idea he was about to sign his own death warrant. Ms. Reed looked down at the page, her expression calm and professional. Excellent, she said. The first and most important administrative provision is Section 7, the Dignity and Integrity Clause. Ms. Reed's voice was steady as she looked down at the document. Excellent. The first and most important administrative provision is Section 7, the Dignity and Integrity Clause. The name of the clause was so innocuous, so benign. Amara nodded along while Chad gave a magnanimous wave of his hand, a silent, get-on-with-it gesture. He was a man on the verge of becoming a king, and he had no time for peasants' paperwork. I watched him lean back in his chair, a picture of smug satisfaction. He had no idea he was a fly caught in a web, and the spider was just beginning to speak. Ms. Reed began to read, her voice a calm legal monotone that carried more menace than any shout ever could. Section 7, subsection A, the vetting provision. to ensure the continued ethical stewardship of the Blackwood legacy. Any spouse of a direct beneficiary hereinafter referred to as the spousal beneficiary must consent to a comprehensive and ongoing background and financial review to be conducted by the trustee or their designated agents. This review is a prerequisite for the initial disbursement of funds and a condition for all subsequent disbursements. I saw the first change in Chad. It was subtle. His body tensed. The lazy, confident sprawl in his chair tightened into a more rigid posture. The smile on his face didn't disappear, but it became fixed, brittle. A background check, he repeated, his voice a little too high. Amara looked confused. She turned to me. "Dad, that seems a little intense, doesn't it? It feels like you don't trust him." Before I could answer, Chad jumped in with a nervous laugh. "Hey, no, it's fine," he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Standard procedure for these big family trusts, I'm sure. I have absolutely nothing to hide. You can check all you want." He was trying to bluff his way through it to maintain control, but I could see a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. Hank sat motionless beside me, a silent observer watching a cornered animal begin to squirm. Ms. Reed continued as if she hadn't heard them, her eyes still on the page. "Which brings us to subsection B, the disinheritance provision." Her voice was like a drumbeat, steady and relentless. "Should said review or any other evidence presented to the trustee prove that a spousal beneficiary has engaged in fraudulent activity, financial misconduct, or a..." She paused for a fraction of a second, letting the next words land with surgical precision, "or a profound and material misrepresentation of their personal history to the family, including but not limited to their familial relations or prior legal entanglements." That was it. That was the kill shot. The phrase familial relations hung in the air like the toll of a funeral bell. I watched Chad's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a pasty gray pallor. His jaw went slack. The confident bluff of a moment ago evaporated, replaced by the stark, naked panic of a man whose entire world has just been pulled out from under him. He knew. In that instant, he knew that we knew. He knew about the actors. He knew about the lawsuits. He knew it was all over. Amara was now looking at Chad, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Chad, honey, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ms. Reed didn't look up. She delivered the final devastating lines of the clause into the dead silent room. "That individual is immediately and permanently disinherited from any and all benefits, direct or indirect, from this trust. Furthermore, any such proven misrepresentation will constitute a fundamental breach of the trust's terms, giving the trustee the authority to suspend all disbursements to the direct beneficiary until the matter is fully resolved." She closed the document. The soft thud of the leather-bound cover hitting the table was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The air in the room was thick with unspoken truths and shattered illusions. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Chad was no longer the conqueror, he was the condemned. He sat there frozen, a statue of a defeated man. Amara was looking at him, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning fear. "Chad, why are you so quiet? What does she mean by familial relations?" Ms. Reed finally looked up, her expression perfectly neutral. "As I said," she stated calmly, "it's a fairly standard clause, a simple measure to protect the family's legacy. We just need your signature on the consent form, Mr. Peterson, and we can proceed." She slid a single sheet of paper and a pen to the center of the table. It was his consent to the background check. It was his confession. It was his death warrant. And it lay there between us, waiting. Amara turned to Chad, her face a canvas of confusion and dawning panic. "Chad," she pleaded, her voice small. "What is she talking about? Familial relations? Just sign the paper, honey. Tell them this is all some crazy misunderstanding." Chad stared at the consent form on the table as if it were a venomous snake. His mind was clearly racing, searching for an escape route, a new lie, a fresh angle. But there was none. We had closed all the exits. He looked up, his eyes wild with desperation. "Don't you see what's happening here, Amara?" he stammered, pushing himself away from the table. "This is a setup. It's a trick. Your father has been trying to sabotage our marriage from day one. He can't stand that you're happy with me, so he's invented this circus to drive us apart." His voice was getting louder, more frantic. He was losing control. Ms. Reed remained perfectly calm. "Mr. Peterson, this is not a trick. It is a standard verification procedure, unless, of course, you have a reason to believe that a verification would uncover certain discrepancies." Her timing was perfect. As she spoke, she reached for the file Hank had prepared. It was a thick manila folder filled with all the ugly truths of Chad's life. She didn't throw it. She didn't slam it down. She slid it with deliberate slowness across the polished glass table. It came to a stop directly in front of Chad. For example, she said, her voice cutting through his panicked protests. "It might uncover these." I watched him stare down at the folder as if he was looking into his own open grave. His hands trembled as he opened it. On the top page was a summary of his credit report, a staggering $200,000 in debt. His eyes darted to the next page, a copy of the lawsuit filed by Eleanor Vance. Then the next one, the suit from Catherine Monroe, his face a mask of horror. And then he reached the final page, the one I knew would break him, the invoice from the Evergreen Actors Guild, the receipt for his fake family. The silence was absolute. He looked up from the paper, his face ashen. He looked at me, at Hank, at Ms. Reed. He saw no sympathy. He saw no escape. He saw only the cold, hard fact of his own exposure. And in that moment he snapped. The carefully constructed persona of Chadwick Peterson, the charming intellectual, the loving husband, shattered into a million pieces. He leaped to his feet, sending his chair crashing backward onto the floor. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. The man who stood there now was a stranger. His face was twisted into a snarl of pure rage, his eyes burning with a vicious hatred I had never seen before. "You!" he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You old bastard! You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting there with your dirty money, looking down on everyone. You were supposed to be a pathetic old man just waiting to die. You were supposed to be easy." Then he turned his fury on the one person who had truly believed in him. He turned on my daughter. "And you," he spat the words at Amara like venom. "You are pathetic. Absolutely useless. I wasted months on you. Months of listening to your boring stories, pretending to care about your pathetic little life. All you had to do was control your own father. All you had to do was get him to sign the papers. But you couldn't even do that. You are worthless." It was a confession, a full confession born of pure rage and a shattered ego. He had admitted everything. That he saw me as a mark, that he had been using her from the very beginning, that he felt nothing for her but contempt. I saw the light die in Amara's eyes. I saw her heart break in that instant. The man she loved, the man she had married, the man she had defended to me, had just revealed himself to be a monster. And he had done it in the most brutal way imaginable. Hank and I remained silent. We didn't need to say a word. We had built the stage, we had written the script, and now the villain was playing his part to perfection, having a complete and total meltdown right on cue. He had just convicted himself with his own words, and my daughter was the sole member of the jury. Chad stood there panting, his chest heaving, his handsome face contorted into an ugly mask of pure fury. He looked around the room, his wild eyes searching for an ally, a way out. But there was none. He saw only the cold, calm faces of his accusers and the shattered wreck of the woman he had just destroyed. He knew it was over. The game was up. His final act was one of pure spite. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this, old man," he hissed. He then glanced at Amara, a look of utter contempt on his face. "Enjoy your allowance." He turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy oak door behind him. The sound was like a thunderclap in the tomb-like silence of the room, and with that sound the spell was broken. Amara, who had been frozen in her chair like a statue of ice, flinched as if she had been physically struck. A single shudder ran through her entire body, a violent tremor that seemed to start in her soul and work its way out. She made a small sound, a choked gasp that was half sob, half cry of disbelief. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Hank or Ms. Reed. She stared at the empty chair opposite her, the chair where her husband had been sitting just moments before. She stared at it as if she could still see the ghost of the man she thought she knew, the ghost of the life she thought she had. My own heart ached with a pain so profound it was difficult to breathe. This was the moment I had dreaded and planned for, the moment of truth. But I had never imagined the sheer brutality of it. I had wanted to save my daughter, not shatter her. In that moment I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. I felt only the deep, wrenching sorrow of a father watching his child suffer the worst kind of betrayal imaginable. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the city noise from 30 floors below seemed to have faded away, leaving only the sound of my daughter's broken breathing. Her gaze slowly drifted from the empty chair to the document spread across the table, her eyes fixed on the invoice from the acting guild, the receipt for her rented family. I saw her read the words, and I saw the final flicker of denial die in her eyes. It was real, all of it. The lies, the deception, the monster. A low, guttural sob escaped her lips, and then she collapsed, not from her chair but within it. She curled in on herself, her arms wrapping around her stomach as if trying to hold her broken pieces together. The tears came then, not loud or hysterical, but deep, silent, soul-shattering sobs that shook her entire frame. It was the sound of a heart, not just breaking, but being utterly obliterated. And all I could do was sit there and watch my beautiful, strong daughter fall apart. I let her cry for a long time. I motioned to Hank and Ms. Reed, and they gave a solemn nod before quietly gathering their things and letting themselves out of the conference room, leaving the three of us alone. The father, the daughter, and the ghost of the man who had tried to tear them apart. I moved my chair from across the table to sit beside her, not touching her, not yet. I just sat there, a silent presence, a steady anchor in the storm of her grief. After what felt like an eternity, the racking sobs subsided into quiet, hiccuping breaths. She finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen raw with a pain that was almost unbearable to witness. Was it all a lie? She whispered, her voice a fragile wreck. Everything he ever said to me. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. I'm so sorry, Amara. I am so deeply sorry that he did this to you. How could I have been so stupid? She choked out another wave of tears, threatening. How could I not see it? I defended him. I fought with you for him. I feel like such a fool. I squeezed her hand gently. Listen to me, sweetheart. You are not a fool. You are not stupid. You are a person with a good and trusting heart. And he saw that. Men like him, they are experts at finding the best in people and using it as a weapon against them. He didn't target you because you were weak. He targeted you because you were good. And your goodness made you believe in his. That is not a flaw in your character, Amara. It is your greatest strength. He just twisted it into a weakness. But why she asked the question that I knew was coming, the one that had to be answered. Why didn't you just tell me all this? The debt, the other women. Why did you have to do this? She gestured vaguely at the room, at the documents, at the wreckage of her life. Why did you let it go this far? I took a deep breath. This was the most important thing I would ever say to her. Because I couldn't tell you the truth, Amara. I had to create a situation where you could see it for yourself. Look at me. If I had come to you a month ago and told you that your fiancé was a con man in debt who hired actors to play his family, what would you have done? She was silent, her tear-filled eyes looking down. I know what you would have done, I continued softly. You would have defended him. You would have accused me of being a jealous, controlling father. And he would have been right there beside you, whispering in your ear, telling you how I was trying to sabotage your happiness. Every word I said against him would have been another brick in the wall he was building between us. If I had attacked him directly, I wouldn't have saved you. I would have lost you. Maybe for good. I waited for her to look at me again. When she did, her eyes were full of a dawning understanding. My only move was to create a stage and give him a role I knew he was incapable of refusing. I had to build a trap baited with his own greed. I couldn't prove to you that he was a liar. I had to let him prove it to you himself. His own words, his own anger, had to be the thing that set you free. It was the only way. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, to watch you walk deeper into his lie, knowing that the only way out was through this terrible pain. But I would do it again. I would walk through fire to get you back. I thought of her mother then, of the wisdom Annalise always seemed to possess. Your mother used to have a saying. She'd say you can't save a ship from a hurricane by shouting at the storm. You have to build a lighthouse bright enough to guide it back to shore. All I did, sweetheart, was try to build you a lighthouse. That was when she truly broke. But it was a different kind of breaking. It was the breaking of a dam, releasing all the pain and confusion. She leaned into me and I wrapped my arms around her, holding my daughter as she cried. But these weren't just the tears of betrayal anymore. They were the tears of understanding, of grief, of a painful, heartbreaking release. I held her tight just as I had when she was a little girl who had fallen and scraped her knee. The wound was so much deeper this time, but the remedy was the same, the unwavering love of a father who would do anything to help his child heal. I held her for a long time, just letting her cry it all out. The pain, the shame, the utter devastation of it all. As I held my daughter in my arms, I realized this was the first time we had truly connected in months. All the superficial conversations, the forced pleasantries, they had all been a part of Chad's illusion. This moment, this raw, heartbreaking moment was real. This was the foundation we would have to rebuild on. Finally, she pulled back slightly, her face stained with tears, but her eyes held a new clarity. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen. I let him turn me against you. He made me believe that you were the one trying to hurt me. I pushed you away, and I am so, so sorry." I gently wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "There is nothing for you to be sorry for, Amara. You fell in love. You wanted to believe in the best in him. That is not a weakness. He is the one who is broken, not you. The only thing that matters now is that you know the truth. The only thing that matters is that you are free." She looked around the cold, sterile conference room at the evidence of her shattered marriage laid out on the table. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Now," I said, pulling her into another hug. "Now we go home, and we heal, together. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but we will do it one day at a time. I've got you. I'll always have you." She buried her face in my shoulder, and for the first time her tears were not just of sorrow but of relief. The storm had passed. The monster had been driven out into the light. My daughter was broken, but she was safe. She was home. And for a father, that is the only victory that truly matters. 6 months have passed since that day in the lawyer's office. The autumn that followed was a season of quiet healing. Amara filed for an annulment on the grounds of fraud. It was granted quickly and without contest. Chad vanished from our lives as completely as if he had never existed, a ghost exorcised by the harsh light of truth. There was no final confrontation, no angry phone calls. He simply disappeared back into the shadows from which he came, presumably to find a new mark, a new life to consume. Amara started therapy the week after he left. She began the difficult work of untangling the web of lies he had woven around her, of learning to trust her own judgment again. She quit her high-pressure corporate job, the one Chad had pushed her into, and she went back to her first love, painting. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a studio for her, and the smell of turpentine and oil paints now fills the house, a scent of creativity and rebirth. Our relationship has been rebuilt piece by piece on a new foundation of honesty. We have brunch together every Sunday. We talk for hours about everything and nothing. We work in the garden side by side, tending to the roses Annalise planted so many years ago. We don't talk about him. There is no need. His name is a scar that is slowly fading. Our silence on the subject is not one of avoidance, but of peace. We are focused on the future, not on the ghosts of the past. Last week she showed me her latest painting. It was a landscape of a sunrise, a brilliant explosion of color and light over a dark horizon. She told me it was called A New Dawn, and I knew then that she was going to be all right. I'm sitting in my study now, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. The document for the Blackwood Legacy Trust sits on my desk. It is not a weapon anymore. It is just a tool that served its purpose. People often say that money changes people. I've come to believe that's not true. Money doesn't change you. It simply reveals who you truly are. For Chad, it revealed a hollow man, a parasite driven by a desperate, insatiable greed. For me, it revealed a truth I had always known, but had never been forced to prove. It revealed that my love for my daughter was worth more than any inheritance. The $12 million did not bring me happiness, but it did buy me the truth. And with that truth, I was able to give my daughter back her future. That is the only legacy that has ever truly mattered. That is the only inheritance worth leaving. If there is one lesson to take from my story, it is this. True love is not about making life easy. It is about making it safe. I could not protect my daughter by simply telling her the truth because the truth was a storm she had to walk through herself. My role was not to silence the thunder, but to be the lighthouse in the darkness, guiding her back to solid ground. Sometimes a parent's most difficult and most loving act is to trust that the foundation you built with your child is strong enough for them to stand on once all the illusions have been washed away. I hope my story has been a meaningful one for you. If you'd like to hear more stories about the challenges that test us and the love that saves us, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's coming next.